Hello, my name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions.
And I'm Proven Paradox, a guy with a lot of questions.
And you're listening to Bright on Buddhism, a podcast where we discuss East Asian Buddhism, answering listener-submitted questions from listeners just like you, and introducing concepts of Buddhism that you may or may not be familiar with in a casual, conversational setting. Enjoy.
Here, is it possible to know the mind of a Buddha?
This question has layers. Thinking of it as one person asking about another, we can reframe it as, can we read another person's thoughts? Only as much as we can read anyone else's. Thinking about it around the meaning of Buddhahood, the question can be reframed as, what is in the mind of the Buddha? This is knowable as well.
How?
Mandalas. They are ways through which we can view and enter into the Buddha's mind, the universe as it really is, the realm of the Dharma.
Aren't we already in the realm of the Dharma?
That's the very question that Mandalas challenge you to ask and explore.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Bright on Buddhism. This week we will be discussing mandalas. What are mandalas? What is their significance in Buddhism? How ought we understand them? We hope you enjoy. So let's get to it. What are mandalas?
A mandala is a 2D visual depicting a variety of different subject matters depending on the context and usage. The word mandala is Sanskrit, and it has a number of potential different translations. The most common is circle or disc. The subject matter of mandalas is, by definition, sacred in a religious context, but it's really actually hard to impose strict boundaries on the definition of what is a mandala and what isn't. We'll see why in a moment. One of the most common mandalas in Buddhism is the mandala of the 6 realms of transmigration.
If you haven't seen this, I recommend you do an image search for it.
This is a great disc broken into 6 sectors, and each of the sectors contains a depiction of the realm of humans, animals, preta, asuras, devas, and hell dwellers. The whole disc is being held by Yama, the deity of death and transmigration. Mandalas can take many different forms. One popular format, which Westerners would be aware of, is when they're composed in colored sand and then blown away to symbolize impermanence. We'll discuss the context of that practice as well, but first, a little history. Mandalas originate in non-Buddhist tantric religious traditions, and in them, they were used in the creation of icons. They represented the domains of various deities, and in so doing attempted to organize the many different heavens and realms of samsara into an intelligible visual representation. Remember that the concept of samsara and the realms of transmigration in Buddhist cosmology originates with pre-Buddhist Vedic traditions. The Vedas reference many, many heavens and realms in samsara, and so iconographers attempted to use mandalas as visual ways to depict those heavens and their inhabitants to make some sense of what is described textually. Building on that, we also see them used in visualization meditation practice. Images of deities and their heavens or realms in which they lived, captured in this mandala format, would be visualized as a sacred space. This practice similarly influenced Pure Land visualization meditation that we've discussed before. In addition to visually mapping out the cosmology for meditation, mandalas then also became centers of tantric practices, or deity yoga practices, involving chanting, breathing, body poses, and ritual offerings made to an icon of a deity. To enter the sacred space where the mandala was enshrined was thought of as entering the heaven that the mandala depicted, or otherwise, the mandala represented a portal to that place. Thus, offerings made before a mandala were able to be transported into that realm. As tantric traditions and Buddhism developed together, mandalas were no longer thought of as a visual representation of a place, or as portals to somewhere else. Rather, they came to be understood as coexisting non-dual realities. In other words, the mandala was the realm it depicted, and this realm was the realm in the mandala as well. And the difference in appearance was a matter of differences appearing to the practitioner due to their karma, or spiritual advancement. We will return to this concept later. Much of this same practice continued in the Buddhist context. They continued to be used for visualization, iconography, and meditation. As Buddhism adopted them historically, The icons in the mandalas went from being Hindu deities to being Buddhist and Hindu ones. Then, as tantric and esoteric traditions both in and out of Buddhism continued to develop, these mandalas took on increasingly universal traits, meaning that they came to be used more and more as comprehensive representations of all reality. They began to express differences among traditions and sects between their cosmologies and doctrines. As a result, there's a huge variety of extant mandalas. Some of them are just pictures of a deity on a platform, maybe with some other figures present around the border of the image or around the platform. Some contain many thousands of figures, all arranged in a particular fashion to represent a doctrine about the reality in which those deities live. Some have no obvious living figures at all, and only contain aniconic representations of the deities. Importantly, though this impression may pervade in the West, mandalas are not simply maps for meditation, or visual cues for visualization. Rather, once they develop in Buddhism, they're used as representations of a universal sacred space within this very realm. They're kind of like if we could get a photograph of the entirety of reality. By its nature, that photograph would contain us, everything and everyone we know, and everything we have ever done or will do. But also, we would be able to hold that photograph in our hands. It would be a piece of paper that we could hang up on a wall and look at. In that way, mandalas teach. They say to the viewer that this is the true nature of reality that you live in. They also challenge the viewer to see the world around them in that way or in that context. They also perform that doctrine by means of depicting what Buddhas and other figures are doing in this realm, especially in the context of 3D mandalas, which we'll discuss later. Now I'd like to speak on sand mandalas. The creation of mandalas in sand is thought to have originated in India in the 8th through the 12th centuries CE, but it's been sort of revived by Tibetan Buddhists in the last several hundred years. As part of a periodical ritual, monks will make colored sand out of various compounds or ground gems, and they'll use copper pipes to drop the sand onto a flat surface, creating depictions of deities and their realms. Then, at the end, the whole thing is blown away. The meaning of the ritual is impermanence, but in a way, it's also a consecration. By creating this divine realm that's depicted in the mandala, they're in a way constructing that realm here. They're constructing the divine and sacred reality depicted in the mandala in this reality. Then, by dispersing the depiction of that realm, by blowing the sand into the air, it's thought that it sort of transforms this realm into the one depicted in the mandala. This serves the purpose of fulfilling bodhisattva vows, which are typically related to vowing to create a pure land or to purify this land that we're in now. This speaks to a crucial function of mandalas. They consecrate that which they depict, and, at the same time, they consecrate the space that they occupy. Any realm depicted in a mandala is sacred, and any space where a mandala sits is a sacred space also. Before we talk more about some of the points I've set up so far, I wanted to address Western psychology and its engagement with mandalas. Famous psychologist Carl Jung encountered mandalas in his studies of various non-Western mystical religious traditions, and he came to conclude that mandalas were windows through which the unconscious could be viewed and understood. In other words, they were pictures of the true nature of the self, or of the mind. Through psychoanalysis, these images could be used to understand ineffable characteristics of a person's mind. None of this is harmful on its face, but Carl Jung is known for having believed in a grand commonality between all human beings everywhere that manifested in ways that could be understood and operationalized diagnostically. And the truth is, that's not held to be a productive line of reasoning in modern psychology anymore. For example, his ideas of archetypes in mythology, his thoughts on the circle as a sacred motif in religious contexts, his ideas on dream interpretation, and more reflect this idea of a grand sameness. In the realms of psychology, culture, religion, there really is no such sameness. If we jump over to the field of archaeology or history, we can see some nutjobs who see that pyramids co-evolved in multiple cultures and infer things about aliens, rather than recognizing that a pyramid is the most stable architectural shape. Carl Jung often seems to be hinting at things in psychology and spiritualism that lie beyond verifiability, and thus are not really super useful to anybody.
What is the significance of mandalas in Buddhism?
In Buddhism, mandalas are used in tantric and esoteric traditions originating in India, Central Asia, and the region of Tibet. As esoteric doctrine develops and evolves, so too do the mandalas and their usages. It's relatively easy to visually trace this evolution in the contents and configurations of the mandalas. Pre-Buddhist or non-Buddhist mandalas often contain figures without the 32 physical marks of the Buddha. For example, they'll be missing the protuberance on the top of the head, the half-closed eyes, etc. Alternatively, they'll be seated on a more chair-like platform or throne rather than a lotus flower, as is the case with Buddhist deities. Similarly, they may be holding different items. Buddhist deities will be making mudras, or they'll be holding a plant, a vajra, a vase of healing water, a jewel, a staff, etc., and the Indian deities will be holding actual weapons, scrolls, or texts, or other items that indicate which tradition they're from. As esoteric Buddhism spreads in China and Japan, the compositional modes and conventions also change. Settings and compositions move from a Central Asian or Indian style to an East Asian style. As an example, one can compare the Manju Vajra mandala and the Taima mandala.
For anyone image searching as we go, those are spelled Manjuvajra and Taima. Again, if you don't know what these look like, I very much recommend taking a look online.
The Manju Vajra mandala is a Tibetan Buddhist mandala venerating Manjushri, and the Taima mandala is a Japanese mandala depicting Amida and his Pure Land of Sukhavati. The Manju Vajra mandala is seen from the top down, and it uses the compositional mode of the yantra, which is like a shape template that's composed of a circle with squared gates at the top, bottom, left, and right. It's a template for the composition of the mandala. The Taima mandala contains no such template. Instead, the view is front on, and it depicts what is described in the Contemplation Sutra, which we've read and discussed. In addition, it contains distinctly Chinese-style architectural and landscape elements, such as pavilions with flared rooftops and pagodas with Chinese-style gardening around them. To further discuss the particular significance of mandalas in Buddhism, we need to discuss the esoteric doctrines that influence their composition. In our episodes on mudras and mantras, we discussed how these are performances of the actions and words of the Buddha as a means of manifesting Buddhahood in this very body, or affecting change in this very world. Mantras and mudras invoke the teachings and the actions of the Buddha in this world, and thus enact change on it. That's why many rituals include mantras and mudras that function as consecrations or blessings. Mandalas similarly realize the realm and the teachings that they depict in this very world. They're understood as a depiction of the mind of the Buddha, and we've mentioned that the mind of the Buddha is equivalent to all of reality, all of the Dharma realm, especially in the context of esoteric Buddhism. This is how mandalas function in the consecration of a sacred space. They're worshipped, they present and manifest sacredness, and they're thought to enact transformation into the sacred upon the world around them. To discuss their usage, we can look at a few different examples in various types of Buddhism. As we've mentioned before, there are two mandalas in particular that are kept in Shingon Buddhist sacred spaces, the Womb Realm Mandala and the Diamond Realm Mandala. They're hung on the left and right walls of temples, with Vairocana in the center. These mandalas are often also used in initiatory rituals for Shingon Buddhist monks in particular. A monk who is being initiated will toss a flower onto the mandala laid flat on a floor, and whichever deity the flower lands on tells the practitioner who they have some secret connection with. The practitioner is then challenged to realize and manifest that secret connection in his practice. Earlier, I mentioned that there are some mandalas with no living figures depicted. Instead, there will be aniconic representations of deities. An example of this kind of mandala is the Moji mandala, also called the Go-Home Zone.
We referenced this one in an earlier episode, but if you weren't there and need to refresh your memory, that is spelled Gohonzon.
This is a calligraphic mandala created by Nichiren to venerate the Lotus Sutra. Down the center, it contains the title of the sutra, and arranged around the title, it has the names of various Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and their attendants. In this, it performs the teaching of the Lotus Sutra, mapping it out through textual labels rather than pictographic depictions of the figures. The scene is meant to depict the doctrine of the Lotus Sutra being preached as the scene is described in the sutra itself. Thus, by using words, or in this case Chinese characters, it is visually performing the teaching of the Lotus Sutra. Some mandalas are only ever pulled out or used for special occasions. Going back to Shingon Buddhism, they will also pull out what is called the Hoshi Mandala, or the Star Mandala, for the Hoshi Matsuri, Star Festival. This festival and the mandala depict Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as celestial bodies, and the goal is to celebrate and venerate all of one's ancestors, going all the way back to these Buddhas as the stars. The stars are seen as representing that people are the total accumulation of all that has ever gone into their continued existence, be it starlight, nutrients from the soil and our food, water from the sky, the energy and love of our parents, etc. This worships those forces as stars in the sky, tracing us to the constellations in a universal network of cause and effect relationships. I would also like to discuss mandalas in and as architecture. Many of the mandalas we've been discussing have been two-dimensional, but sometimes mandalas are rendered in 3 dimensions as statue programs, or groups of statues arranged in particular poses and arrangements. I've done a great deal of my research on Shingon statue programs as performances of a mandala, a particular doctrine in Shingon, or a particular ritual in perpetuity. Earlier, I mentioned that change over time in doctrine can be traced in the content of the mandalas. The same applies, and it's still true, with these 3-dimensional mandalas in the form of statue programs. For more on this in a particular set of temples, check out the Research Project Series episode on the reconstruction of Todaiji, linked in the show notes. The purpose of statue programs is to invite the viewer into the mandala itself and to construct this world as the world of the mandala. Rituals are performed in that context, and thus are consecrated in a way that other rituals are not. This concept can be scaled up as well. Entire temple buildings and compounds can be designed to be mandalic. As an example, the temple complex on top of the famous Mount Koya, seat of Shingon Buddhism in Japan, is a mandalic construction. The 2 towers on that temple compound, the Danjo Garan and the Konpon Daito, represent 2 of what religion scholars have called axis mundi. This is a label affixed to obelisks and towers, and it means axis of the world. These 2 towers, as axes of the world, are the 2 poles of the sacred mandala of the 2 realms that overlays the entire world. Many other temples replicate this mandalic construction, from the arrangements of the pagodas and buildings to the statue programs within, and even the icons on the walls. This scales even further upwards. Entire countrywide networks of temples in Japan have thought to comprise a grand mandala. One more note on the usage of mandalas before we move on. Mandalas will be ritual spaces in themselves, and thus will be spaces where offerings are made, where mantras and mudras are performed, and where meditative or ascetic practices take place. The figures in the mandalas, be it 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional, are believed to truly be there. When you have a mandala in front of you, the Buddhas in it are participating with you. They're viewing you as you are viewing them. You're in audience with the Buddhas. And we've talked before about how making an offering to the Buddha and hearing a Buddha preach is thought of as a prerequisite for achieving Buddhahood, especially in Mahayana and esoteric Shingon Buddhism. Thus, mandalas are used and treated in such a way in ritual contexts. Making offerings before a mandala is the same as making an offering to the Buddhas within. Speaking mantras or making mudras with your body before a mandala puts you into that mandala, while also not taking you away from this world here. This is what makes the practitioner into a Buddha themselves.
How ought we understand mandalas?
I think that there are several different levels or perspectives that can be applied to understand mandalas. One is to understand them as works of visual art. Whether they're paintings, sand art, statuary, or architecture, they represent religious artistic expression in the way that the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel or the Statue of David do. They're highly refined works of art that consistently make use of the latest and greatest technologies, modes, and conventions in the realm of contemporary visual art production. To pull out particularly awe-inspiring examples, large prints of the Vajrabhairava mandala or large-scale sand mandalas are incredible to behold.
That's VAJRABHAIRAVA.
The colors and detail are incredible, and one can look at them for hours and simply get lost. The same is true of statuary. I've seen some truly incredible Buddha statues rendered in copper, bronze, wood, stone, etc., from the scale of a few inches tall to a few dozen feet tall, and they're truly wonderful. The artistry in the carving, construction, and decoration is unbelievable, especially when viewing pre-modern statues that had to make use of pre-modern statue production techniques. The same can be said of architecture. Buddhist architecture is my passion, and visiting temple spaces is always a thrill for me. The interweaving of function, decoration, embodiment of doctrine, and performance of ritual in the architecture itself will never fail to impact me strongly in Buddhist spaces. It's truly incredible to study. Building on that, the next level at which mandalas can be understood is as sacred space. We've described how they depict sacred spaces and how they show the world as it can be viewed with an enlightened eye. They depict realms, heavens, and spaces that are regarded as holy. Similarly, they consecrate and center sacred space in this realm. And then, of course, going one step further, they manifest or realize that sacred space. The next level at which mandalas can be understood is as religious practice. The creation of sacred art is in itself a religious practice, and that practice is constrained by doctrine. There are sutras, treatises, and documents in religious traditions that prescribe the creation of mandalas and icons of the Buddha, to say nothing of the common artistic conventions that are determined by culture and time period. Then, once the mandala is created, its usage and function in sacred space, consecration, ritual, religious activity, and everything else we've described so far is a crucial aspect of understanding mandalas. Mandalas, while being a part of religious practice in their construction and their ritual usage, also depict religious practice. The Taima mandala depicts Amida and his attendants preaching the Dharma to the assembled inhabitants of the Pure Land of Sukhavati. While there, they're meditating and attaining enlightenment. Thus, religious practice is taking place in the mandala. Similarly, the Shingon mandalas perform or depict the mind of Vairocana, wherein religious practice takes place. In previous episodes, we've described that mandalas are the entire universe. They're representative of several things that are all regarded as one. They represent the mind of the Buddha, the whole universe, the Dharma realm, suchness, emptiness, and Buddha nature. And all of these are just one single thing. These are all regarded as the same as each other, especially in esoteric Buddhism. Remember the photograph metaphor I used earlier. A mandala is like a photograph or a snapshot of what the world is like if viewed with an enlightened mind. A photograph is an imperfect metaphor, though, because the mandalas can be entered into. They're like real-time video footage that can be held on a piece of paper and can be entered into in 3 dimensions by means of a statue program. Video footage is even imperfect as a metaphor because video footage is a representation of events that take place or have taken place, and mandalas are even more real than that. Mandalas are thus the culmination of all of the above and more. Please go out and view the mandalas I've mentioned or described in this episode, either online or in person. They are truly sights to behold.
We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion of mandalas. Join us next week where we will be discussing Haibatsu Kishaku movement. What was the Haibatsu Kishaku movement in Meiji Japan? Why did it happen? What was the result? We hope to see you there. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Hi, Nick here, and you've been listening to Bright on Buddhism. Normally at this point in the episode, we would throw to a charity that we think that is deserving of your money or your support. Because there's so much going on right now, we have decided that we're going to open it up to any charity that you think is a good cause to share your resources with. So, if you like our show and would like to support us, please instead give to a charity that you believe does good things for people in need. Thank you.
My name is Nick Bright, scholar of East Asian religions and voice of Hearer.
And I'm Docs, editor, question asker, and voice of Hermit.
And this has meant Bright on Buddhism. Thank you for listening. If you like our podcast, or if you have a question you'd like us to discuss, we'd love to hear from you. Please consider leaving a comment or review, subscribing, or joining us on social media. Email us at bright.on.buddhism@gmail.com or find us on Mastodon at brightbuddhism@mstdn.party. As always, citations and resources for this episode can be found in the show notes. Thank you.